Okay, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Okay, so we've finished our brief coverage of issues on fasting. And I want to start with a reminder that our education and practice and commitment to Islam is something that we're always renewing. And so an individual class, an individual hour of study, a day of study, a week of study, a month of study, all of that is part of the lifetime of study. And so we're trying to provide as much resources as we can today for preparing ourselves for Ramadan. But my encouragement is take the slides that we have gone over today, review them, read more, educate yourself, but most importantly is have a level of confidence in what you've learned, stick to what is certain for you that you know, and continue working upon what you know and what you're certain of until you learn something else. One of the things that gets a lot of people stuck is they hear about differences of opinion, variance of opinion. This scholar said this scholar said that. And they get trapped in the process of trying to process all of that and actually never do anything. So whatever you're confident in, that you have certainty in, they have certain level of yaqeen in, then that's what you should act according to until in the learning process you come to other realizations or you learn more information. So today, right now, we're going to continue with Zakat. And in this lesson, we're going to be talking about Zakat on assets. We're going to talk about Nisab, gold and silver, and how to calculate Zakat. Now, there are a few core terminologies that are important to understand. The word Zakat comes from the Arabic Zaka yazku zakatan, to purify. And in fact, it's the same root word that's used for when a plant grows. Zaka zar'u. The plant paid zakah, when it shed its leaves and it grew. This is where the idea of purification comes from. So if you're a plant and you shed your leaves, why are you doing so? You're shedding your leaves so that you can make room for new leaves. You're shedding your leaves so that you can rid yourself of disease. You're shedding your leaves so that you can fertilize the ground around you. So zakah, similarly, allows us room for growth financially. It allows us room for growth spiritually. It fertilizes the land and the people that are around us. It rids us of impurities. Sadaqah is another associated term. You will at times read ayat and ahadith where the word used is sadaqah. But the intent is zakah, is the obligation of zakah. In the early years of Islam, they were used interchangeably for anything that was being given. And then, as the Muslim community grew and the rulings of Islam were revealed and became more clear, then sadaqah remained this overarching charity that was given, and zakat became very specific to zakat on our wealth or zakat al-fitr. Nisab is the designated portion. It is a minimum liability amount. It's the amount of money that you have to have had in savings for a year or more that makes you liable for paying zakah. So, is zakah obligatory on everyone? Yes, but not everyone has to pay it unless they meet the conditions for paying zakah. It's a very important point. I many times find people who will, for example, accept Islam and they'll say, okay, well, I'll just give 2.5% of every paycheck that I make. And that's not intended. What's intended is that you take care of yourself, you take care of your family, you take care of those that you're responsible for maintaining. And then if you have money left over after that, you have above and beyond your needs, then that's when you're going to pay zakat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ مَاذَا يُنْفِقُونَ قُلِ الْعَفْوُ. They ask you what they should pay from, say that which is surplus. So that which is above and beyond your needs is what you pay from. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the hadith of Hakim ibn Hizam, اليد العليا خير من اليد السفلى وابدأ بمن تعول. The upper hand is better than the lower hand, but begin with those that are dependent upon you. So we have the responsibility to care for our parents, our grandparents, our children, our grandchildren, our family members who maybe aren't able to care for themselves. And imagine if every family in the United States was doing that, was not living selfishly, but living purposefully and giving to those that are connected to them. Maybe if their immediate family members are doing well, they're helping their extended family. If their extended family is doing well, they're helping the family that's on the outskirts of their relationships, and then they're helping their neighbors, both near and far. How much poverty, how much family strife, how many difficulties are we going to have? At that point, 2.5% would be more than enough. In fact, I firmly believe that if Muslims were reliably paying their zakat every year around the world, we would alleviate poverty. But that takes a certain level of commitment from us. The Arabic word hawl will come up when you read about zakat. It simply means a year or a yearly cycle. It's like your fiscal year when you're doing your business taxes or when you're in business, but this is your zakat year. It's a lunar year, so it's 11 days shorter than the solar year. There are two prominent currencies and thus precious metals or stores of value that were used at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. One of them is gold, known as mithqal or dinar. Those were both measurements of gold. And the other is silver or the dirham. Dinar actually comes from the Roman denarius, and dirham comes from the Greek drachma, which is still the name of the Greek currency until today. So the Arabian Peninsula was using the currencies of the empires that were around it, which is why you find early Islamic currency before the year 70, that would on one side of it have a picture of the Sasanian king or emperor, and on the other side of it say La ilaha illallah. Why? Because they wanted to make sure that currency was accepted both in the Islamic state as well as in the neighboring states. So it needed to have, dual markings. It was then in the year 70 when Abdul Malik ibn Marwan said, let's get rid of the marks of all of these other places and we'll standardize and strike a dinar and a dirham according to the weights that were used by the Prophet ﷺ. So there's no variance. So the prophetic dirham was about 2.65 grams, and the prophetic dinar, or the dinar used at that time, was about 4.245 grams. I put tax here at the end simply to say that zakat is not a tax. Yes, it can be understood like a flat tax on savings. And in fact, if you were to look at, different tax regimes around the world, you have a VAT tax, you have income tax, you have sales tax, you have wealth tax, you have flat tax on savings, a flat tax on wealth. There's a lot of different perspectives around it. I truly believe that zakat is one of the only systems that takes into consideration not being regressive by chastising or penalizing the poor. So there is a minimum that you have to have before you actually pay zakat. But also it doesn't penalize the wealthy and those who have earned their wealth by making their taxes higher the more money that they get. Are there other sources of income for the Muslim country that is taking care of its citizens? Yes, there are. Zakat is not the only thing in the Sharia that's a source of income for the country. There's al-khums, there's al-ushr, there's a number of other sources. Zakat is the one source that is dedicated to social welfare. And that's one of a very big differentiation. So, what are the preconditions for zakat liability? Number one, zakat is only due on those things that you own fully. So it is not due on property that is owned by someone else. It's not due on public property. It's not due on property that might have been designated for you but has not been given to you. So for example, if somebody says, I just really like you, I want to give you $5,000. Do I include that in my zakat when I'm calculating? No, I don't, because I haven't actually been given that money, right? It's not until I can actually receive it that something becomes mine, and thus I'm liable for it. It's also only due on that which you can invest, spend, or give away. So there has to be some form of benefit that can be taken from that money. So if you have money, for example, let's say, for example, you lend someone $500 and they deny that you ever lended it to them and they refuse to pay you. You don't pay zakat on that money. Why? Because you're unable to spend it, invest it, or give it away. It should also be liquid wealth that you can benefit from. Liquid here is the key term, meaning that it's same as cash, that you can actually use it. If you have illiquid wealth, let's say, for example, someone left you one of these beautiful art pieces that you see around here. Let's say, look at that glass. You guys say vase or vase? I have to be, let's say vase because, it's so expensive. So let's say somebody left you that there in the alcove over there, right? You have no way of determining what it's worth, right? And therefore, you wouldn't pay zakat on it until you actually determined what it's worth, which means if you sold it, then you would pay on the sales price, but you wouldn't pay year after year. Why? Because it's not liquid. It's illiquid. And there are a number of other things that related to that. It's only due on that which you hold for a year or more. It's narrated from Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu that he said, "La zakata illa ma hala alayhi al-hawl." There is no zakah except for what a year has passed on. And because of that, the scholars of Islam have a consensus. There's a point of ijma' that the passing of a year is necessary for the obligation of zakah. Also, what isn't burdened by debt. So when you owe money to others, your obligation is to pay them first, then pay your zakah. And this is a general rule with debt, that if you have a debt which is due, you must pay that debt that is due before you try to fulfill an obligation. Question that always comes up every year. Somebody says, okay, well, on the idea of debt, let's say I owe a debt and I want to make hajj. Is my hajj valid? Can I make hajj? Who says yes? Who says no? It seems like the fuqaha here are differing of opinion. So I'll explain the two situations. So there are debts that are currently due, and there are debts that are scheduled to be paid. If I can continue with my schedule, I can make hajj. Why? Because it doesn't prevent me from doing so, and it doesn't prevent you from being paid. But if I borrowed $10,000 from you, and I came to you and I said, hey, you remember that $10,000 you owe me, that I owe you? And you go, yeah. I was wondering when you're going to talk to me about that. And I say Mabruk. And you go, Mabruk? And I say, yeah, I'm going for hajj this year. Aren't you going to congratulate me? Like, no, man, you owe me $10,000. So in that situation, you have to pay the $10,000 first, and you shouldn't go to hajj. Because why? The debt is due, and it's being claimed. Whereas if it was scheduled, it's not. Similarly with zakah. If you have a debt which is due, you can deduct it from your expenses. You pay that. But if a debt is scheduled for the long term, then you do not deduct it. Uthman radiallahu anhu is narrated as saying, it's found in the Muwatta of Imam Malik and other places, هَذَا شَهْرُ زَكَاتِكُمْ فَأَدُّوا إِلَى النَّاسِ دُيُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ ادْفَعُوا زَكَاتَكُمْ. This is the month of your zakah. So pay your debts and then pay the zakat which is upon you. And then also it meets the minimum requirement, which is the nisab. So if you, and we'll talk about how to calculate that in a moment. If these conditions apply, then you owe zakah. So what's the basic formula for zakah? Number one, you want to figure out what your pure assets are. So you want to take your total assets and you want to subtract any haram earnings that are in those. You might say to me, astaghfirullah, how are you saying? Are you saying it's allowed to earn haram? No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that in the modern financial world, it is bound that at times some haram wealth will happen to you. I remember one year I filed my taxes. My tax return didn't come. I got my tax return maybe 2 months late. And then a week after that, I got a check from the IRS that said, this is a check for something like, like $50, something, $49.97, something like that. This is interest income. We held your return and we kept it in an interest-bearing account, and we're mandated by law to give you that interest. But you're mandated to report this interest income on your taxes next year. I said, wow, this is like a Ponzi scheme or something. I'm not sure what's going on. So what do I do with that $49.97 or whatever it was? Give it away in charity. So I don't count that to be from my wealth. Now, there are two perspectives amongst ulama as to haram earnings. Do I include them in the total assets and then pay zakat on the total, or do I subtract them first, then pay zakat? Both of them are valid. So you have your net worth, which means you know what your pure assets are minus your immediate liabilities. So what are your immediate liabilities? We'll go on over that in the next slide. So if your net worth of liquid available wealth is greater than the nisab for more than a year, then you're going to take that, multiply it by 2.5% or 2.578%. Why the difference, guys? Remember that we said that the lunar year is 11 days shorter than the Gregorian year. So while you should be using the lunar year as it is our Islamic calendar, if you have a need to use the Gregorian calendar and keep everything, say you're doing your taxes and your zakah and everything at the same time, then you want to add the difference of those 11 days, and that becomes that 0.078%. Okay. So here is a very succinct slide about assets, liabilities, and haram earnings. So non-liable assets. If you have personal effects, the coat in your closet, the clothes in your dresser, the knickknacks that are on your coffee table, your couches, the things in your home, your car, those things which are personal, you do not owe zakat on. La zakata على العبد أو على المرء في عبده ولا فرسه is the hadith. There's no zakat due by a man on his slave or his horse. So things that were personal effects that were owned were exempted from zakat. Also, uncollectible debt. We talked about that a moment ago. The person either denies, or it's not due, or it can't be paid, then you don't include it. If you have lost, frozen, or inaccessible wealth, then when you get access to that money, you will pay one time on that amount of money and then add that to your total assets and pay every year. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, you go and you buy a plot of land. Well, now buying land here outside of Houston, you keep going farther and farther, right? So you used to be able to say Sealy and it sounded like a far place, right? But now you have to go past Sealy. Like, what's past Sealy? I don't know. Flatonia? That's a real name? It sounds like a DC superhero. He's from the planet of Flatonia. So let's say you go to Flatonia, you buy a land, and there's a dry well, and you're walking. Let's just say you're walking with a bag of gold, and you trip and fall, and your bag of gold falls to the bottom of the well. Do you own the land? Do you own the gold? Do you pay zakat on the gold? No. If you can't access it, then you don't pay it, even if you own it. When do you pay the zakah? When you actually can get it out of the gold. So they call this a mal al-dimar. So it's lost or inaccessible wealth. Let's say back home in your country that you might be from, that you put certain amounts of money in a bank account, and then the government found out that you also live in the United States, so they freeze your accounts. Do you pay zakat on that money? No, you don't, because it's frozen, it's inaccessible. Is it yours? Yes. Will you pay zakat on it when you access it? Yes, you will. But right now, you're not liable to pay. And then illiquid wealth, like we gave the example of the vase or the vase, would be would be exempt as well. Liable things are like gold and silver, cash and cash equivalents. Cash and cash equivalents are things like liquid security. So if I own 1,000 shares of Apple or I own 1,000 shares of Home Depot, then I can sell those in the market from my brokerage account. That's liquid. Business inventory. If I own a business and I am moving inventory and that inventory has a value, then I will also pay zakat on the value of that inventory. If I have debt, then I can collect on. So let's say, for example, I said, all right, well, I know that you owe me $500, and you say, sure, I owe you $500. Pick it up whenever you want. I'll be happy to give it to you. Or send me your Zelle and I'll transfer it to you. And I'm lazy and I don't. Do I pay zakat on that? Yes, I do. Why? Because I have the ability to collect on it. Similar to this are accounts receivable, where they might have a net 30 or 60 or 90. The money's coming in. You're already including it in your accounting. You pay on that as well. Livestock and agriculture. If you are a farmer who grazes your animals, pasture raised, right? You're not raising them in pens. You pay on a per head basis. We will not be going over. I highly doubt any of you today are farmers. Are we lucky enough to have one? The amazing thing was I taught Kitab al-Zakat about 7 months ago in Minnesota. Several of the brothers there and their wives, they are camel and sheep farmers. And so that was the very first time I've ever taught Kitab al-Zakat and had actual farmers that graze their animals ask me questions, which was really interesting. And then one of the sisters from the back corrected her husband because he miscounted the sheep. If you own animals to sell as business assets, you'll treat them like inventory. But if you raise them and they graze in a field, then in that case you're going to pay that on a per head basis. So it's a difference of looking at them as same as cash or looking as a per head basis. And then on all of the above, you pay on those yearly. What are some liabilities? Liabilities are things like your taxes, your mortgage payments, your rental payments, your insurance premiums, your utilities, your living expenses, debts you owe others. Very important. If you owe these, you deduct the most recent amount. Meaning that if I'm going to pay my zakat on the 27th of Ramadan, and 27th of Ramadan is, this year is probably going to be what? Maybe April 9th or something. And let's say I pay rent on April 1st. So then I will deduct my rent of April 1st. And then after that, I will pay zakat on the 9th. So I will not project my debts into the future. Because if you did that, no one would end up paying zakat. Everybody would keep extending the debts that they owe and end up never paying zakat. But we can deduct the most immediate debts from that. Okay, who should I give my zakat to? Well, there are two types of people. One type you should not give your zakat to, and the other is who zakat is meant to go to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the 8 categories of people that zakat should go to in Surah At-Tawbah, which is the 9th surah, the 60th verse. إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب وفي سبيل والغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل فريضة من الله. That zakat, or the sadaqah, meaning the obligatory zakat, is only due to the destitute, the poor, those collecting it, to soften the hearts, in manumission, meaning freeing slaves, those in debt, in God's path, and the wayfarer. So what are some examples of each of these categories? The destitute are people that don't have enough money or food for the day. The poor are those who have enough food for the day, but maybe not the week. You might say to yourself, what's the benefit of mentioning these two categories? Why both of them? Because what we're trying to do is create a rubric for making a judgment call when we have limited resources and lots of people to service. So if we have a person who won't be able to eat tomorrow, and we have another person who won't be able to eat next week, which of them is more dire? The person who won't be able to eat tomorrow, right? Similarly, The fuqara and the masakin take priority over all of the other categories. Is it valid to give your zakat to any category? Yes. Can you give all of your zakat to one category? Yes. Do you have to split it up equally amongst all of the categories? No. However, if you have people that are poor and destitute and don't find subsistence to even survive, they take a priority over people that are in debt or over people that are of the other categories, for example. Those collecting it are those officials designated by the legitimate Muslim government to collect the zakah and distribute it. This does not include charity organizations that do lots of things, including zakah. So this does not include your local masjid, your local Islamic center. They are considered a wakil. They are your agent for collecting and distributing zakah. They are not a stand-in for the legitimate zakat authority. To soften the hearts, al-mu'allafatu qulubuhum. The majority of scholars say that this category remains. There is one school that says that it does not remain. Regardless, it seems that the stronger opinion is that it does remain, and that goes to several types of people. Number one is the person who is new in Islam and is infirm in their faith. They may be given zakat to help support them and strengthen their faith. Number two are the people who are at risk. So converts, number one, at-risk people that might have been part of the community, but they are at risk of leaving the community or of falling into ideological danger. And then thirdly are those people who are not Muslim. However, they may be interested in Islam, or there's a benefit in giving them because they will protect Muslim interests. That's included in softening the hearts. In manumission, freeing slaves is the core idea right here. People say slavery doesn't exist. Slavery still exists. Slavery exists all around the world. Slavery exists in many different forms. Human trafficking is a form of slavery. There is still slavery in India. You would imagine the largest democracy in the world. Still, according to most international human rights organizations, has a huge problem with this as well. The United States still has slavery. A lot of people don't realize that. It does not have private slavery anymore, but it does have public slavery, meaning that when you are convicted of a crime, you become a slave to the prison system. And there's a huge problem now with the fact that the prison systems are now owned by private entities, which kind of undoes the whole idea about there being a 13th Amendment. In fact, there's still moves in the Congress to solve that problem and eliminate the public option and eliminate private companies from getting into servicing the prison industry as well. So, can you give money to help get people out of jail? Yes, you can. Can you give money to help eliminate human trafficking? Yes, you can. Can you give money to free slaves that are being held against their will? Yes, you can. Those in debt. People whose debts are a burden to them and will cause them legal issues. And they have incurred them doing something which is permissible. So if somebody goes to Louisiana and blows all of their money on blackjack and goes into debt because they took then no, you don't give them zakah to help them out of that. But if somebody was doing legitimate business and they had a business failure and they, for example, went into debt and they're unable to work and support themselves and pay the debt, then yes, you can give them zakat to extinguish that debt, which puts them on a clean slate to then build their lives back. In God's path. Oh, another point about paying debts. It is preferred that if somebody comes to you with a debt that should be paid, that you ask for proof and that you pay that debt directly to the creditor instead of giving it to the person in cash. Let's say they can't pay their light bill, you just send the check directly to the utilities instead of giving them the cash. Is it permissible to give them the cash? Yes, it is, but you need to have a level of trust to know that they're going to use it for that. In God's path refers to non-conscripted soldiers that are defending Islamic lands. And then the wayfarer, Ibn Sabil, is called the son of the road precisely because it's as if this person was stripped of all of their property and all of their earnings and all of their possessions and was given birth to by the road. That's why they're called Ibn Sabil. Tamakhadahu tariq. Right? So it's like they were born out of the road because they have absolutely nothing. So this is the person who, although they may have money where they're from, they have no access to, or they've been stripped of, or separated from that wealth. So they can be given enough money to make it back home, to make it to a place of security, or if they're a person who's like a refugee, or a displaced person, or a forced migrant, they can be given zakah in order to start life anew, even if they were wealthy in their previous life before they were a forced migrant. Oh, there was the left side. Who should zakat not go to? Zakat should not go to the rich. I think this is self-explanatory. Nor should it go to a person who's an able-bodied worker who has the ability to work and finds work but chooses not to. This is different than a person who has the ability to work but does not find work, or that work would involve them having to do something which is morally compromising. The Prophet ﷺ was approached by two young men as he was distributing sadaqah in the back of the masjid, or distributing zakat in the back of the masjid, and they asked him. And so فَطَالَ عَفِيهِمَا sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So he looked them up and down. And then he said, إِن سَأَلْتُمَا أَعْطَيْتُكُمَا. If you ask me, I'll give you. وَلِتَعْلَمَ أَنَّ الصَّدَقَ لَا تَحِلُّ لِغَنِيٍّ وَلَا لِذِي مِرَّةٍ سَوِيٍّ. You should know, though, that this charity is not allowed for a rich person, a wealthy person, or a person who is able-bodied. Next is the family of the Prophet ﷺ. We mentioned the hadith about Al-Hasan earlier in Bukhari, that the Prophet said sadaqah is not permissible for Muhammad or the family of Muhammad ﷺ. So the family of the Prophet ﷺ is supported through the khums and through the general donations of the Muslims. If there is a person from Ahl al-Bayt who is unable to be supported, then scholars prefer that they are given the zakah of Ahl al-Bayt, goes to the poor of Ahl al-Bayt. Can non-Muslims receive zakah? The general rule is no, unless it is from al-mu'allafatu qulubuhum, unless it is from softening the hearts. Some scholars have allowed it in cases where there is an absolute absence of deserving Muslims, but the majority do not agree with that. Your family members should not receive zakat from you. So there's consensus that your parents, children, and wives cannot be given zakah. Why can you not give your wife zakah? It's your responsibility. Now, why can't you give your mother zakah? So who's more of a responsibility for you, your wife or your mother? No, your mother. You can always get another wife. You can't get another mother. That's self-explanatory. You might think, oh, he's gonna get in trouble. I don't have a wife, so it doesn't matter. It's not a big problem for me. So people ask this question to me every year, and they say, can I give my mother zakah? And I say no, and they get surprised. What do you mean I can't give my mother zakah? Your mother is not a charity case. Your mother is the case. If you spend all of your wealth supporting your mother and your father, your grandmother and your grandfather, and you have no wealth left over from which to pay zakah, you have met your obligation. So you don't withhold money from caring for your family and then just give them the little bit that you purify. No, you care for your family and then pay zakah from whatever is left over. So that's a very important distinction. So the idea here is we think of it in the sense of being vertical, right, and horizontal. Parents, grandparents, however so high, can't give them zakah. Children, grandchildren, however so low, can't give them zakah. What about horizontally? Can I give my siblings zakah? Yeah, in general, yes, right? In general, yes. Especially if they're a sibling who you have not been financially responsible for. Let's say, for example, you have a sister that got a divorce and that now she doesn't have someone caring for her and she's finding difficulty supporting herself, right? That's different than a sister who is a minor who's supposed to be in your or your parents' care. There's difference there. Cousins, uncles. So anyone that is horizontal can receive. Can a husband receive zakah from his wife? Why? Because she's not responsible for caring for him financially. So if she chooses to support him, then she can. Ladies, however, you should be careful, though, that many times the sisters in our community are extremely giving, and they give without asking, also without intention sometimes. And then they find out years later, all that money that I spent on the family, he never plans to pay me back. Or all that money that I spent on the family, I could have made the intention of it being zakat or sadaqah and be rewarded for that. So remember, intentionality is key in anything that you do. And if you do spend on the family because maybe your husband is unable to work or your family's having a hard time, and you have the intention of sadaqah, then that's the best type of sadaqah that you can give. The Prophet ﷺ told Zainab, the wife of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, إِنَّهَا صَدَقَةٌ وَصِلَةٌ. It's a charity and a strengthening of family ties. Right? However, if you give it with the intention of simply stepping in where he is unwilling to, let's say, for example, you have a bill that has to be paid and you have to pay it, then you have the right to reclaim that as a debt from your husband, not to simply chalk everything up to sadaqah. So the idea is any family member whose maintenance you are not responsible for may be given zakah, and anyone who you are responsible for may not be given zakah. Okay. Special considerations. Can I prepay or late pay my zakah? You should never pay your zakah late. However, there is a time where you might need to calculate your zakah and set your zakah aside and then act as a trustee for the safe delivery of that zakah. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have that cousin that you know you don't have to maintain and you can pay your zakah to. But you also know that cousin needs $100 a month in order to be able to survive. And if he doesn't have that $100 a month, then his wife and children are going to suffer. So you calculate your zakat and you find out that your zakat this year is $1,200. Do you give him $1,200 a month and you know that he's wasteful and he would spend it on personal desires or things that he wants? No, you can set that $1,200 aside and then give him $100 a month so that you guarantee that the zakat is used for what it's necessary for. So that's the only time where that arrangement would be okay. Otherwise, you have to pay your zakat on time. Can you prepay your zakat? Yes, you may. The Prophet ﷺ allowed his uncle Al-Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib to prepay his zakat up to 2 years in advance. When is this beneficial? This is beneficial when you have business revenue or personal income that you know is going to be consistent, number one. And number two, you know that there's a need this year for that zakat to be given. So let's say, for example, there's a major need that there's some fundraiser for, and you say to yourself, you know what? I'm not going to see a salary increase this year. I might see it next year. I'm going to give this year's zakat, I'm going to double it with the intention of it being for this year and next year. That's valid as well, right? And that will come up in a moment for another slide when we talk about nisab. We mentioned about the lunar and solar calendar years to add 0.078% if you use the solar calendar, although the basis that you should be working off of is the Islamic calendar, the lunar calendar. Can we pay recipients in installments? We mentioned that. And then where should your zakah be distributed first? The general opinion of most scholars of all 4 major schools of Islamic law and in general is that your zakah essentially goes in obligations in circles out from where you live. So if you send your zakah far away and you have poor people that are struggling in your locality, your zakah might be invalid. Which is why I highly encourage everyone to give some of their zakat locally and to also support international needs. Now, what does that mean in a globalized society and in societies that have social welfare? What that means is I want to look and see where my charity is going to be best used. So I'll tell you what I do personally, and you can make your own informed decision. Personally, I will take my zakat al-mal and I will give the majority of it here in the United States, because I know that most people will have access to food stamps or WIC and therefore have food in their refrigerators, but they might not have money to pay their electricity bill or buy their children's school clothes. Whereas if I were to give my udhiyah and zakat al-fitr here locally, you would be giving it to people who already have a refrigerator full of food. And so therefore, like the past, Allah yarhamu, my friend's grandfather used to run an orphanage in Syria. We used to do our udhiyah there every year. Because we knew if we give it there, it's reaching the needy, and it's going to be used from head to hoof. Whereas here, you go to the processing plant, and you'd be lucky if you get anything more than the meat and the bones. Right? So there are more efficient ways to use certain types of charity around the world. What you should be thinking of is, where can I be most effective for the ummah here at home as well as abroad? But you should certainly not live and use the United States or your locality like an ATM, taking money out, sending it elsewhere, and then developing the resentment of the poor and the needy in your locale because you're not spending on them. This is why the Prophet ﷺ told Mu'adh, تُؤْخَذُ مِنْ أَغْنِيَائِهِمْ فَتُرَدُّ فِي فُقَرَائِهِمْ, that the zakat is taken from their poor and distributed amongst, taken from their rich and distributed amongst their poor. So there is something to be said about giving money locally. I also, another issue about giving, and I had a conversation with one of my friends about this just recently while I was in Minnesota. He told me, he said, when I give, I only give to charities that are hyper-focused. I said, what do you mean? He said, I don't give to charities that do every form of charity. He goes, I give to charities that are focused on one thing. He said, for example, there's a charity that I give to, they only work with blind orphans. I know exactly where my money is going, and it's quantifiable from them, and I don't have to just hear kind of a general appeal. I know exactly where the money is going. Right? There's a couple of others that he mentioned as well. So being as intentional as you can is very important. Okay. Why is there a minimum amount or nisab? So this is an approximation with modern currencies. So probably the most famous gold coin that's available now is the Kruger Rand. It's a South African gold coin. So if you had 3 of those, that would be about 85 grams of gold, which is equal to 20 dinar during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, which is the minimum amount of gold that you have to have for your zakat to be due on gold. For silver, if you had about 20 American silver dollars, that would be equivalent to the nisab of silver. And that's about 595 grams of silver or 200 dirham. The idea behind the nisab is that you have money above and beyond your needs for a year left over. And the reason why we pay zakat on the savings is to encourage us throughout the year to give, to spend, to invest, and not to hoard wealth. Now you might be saying to yourself, how can I approximate this? Take, for example, the Prophet ﷺ, I believe it was Abu Sa'id in the Sahih. He sent him with 1 dirham, and he said, go to the marketplace and buy me a sheep. So the cost of 1 sheep was about 1 dirham. So imagine if you had 200 dirhams, you may be able to have 200 sheep, which would be a revenue-generating source of income for you, right? So the idea here is that when you have enough money to where it's growing and it can grow, you want to give a little portion of that to purify your wealth from any of the mistakes or sins or mishaps that have happened throughout the year. Give that to the poor and the needy and allow all boats to rise. Allow everyone to be able to benefit from it. If you look throughout the texts of Islam, you will see that every single time Allah has mentioned the prohibition of riba, He has also mentioned the order of sadaqah and zakah. Every time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has talked about business, He has also talked about giving. Because you have to have these 2 things for a healthy economy. You cannot have simply production and consumption, right? You have to have production and a for-profit model. You also have to have a non-profit sector and then consumption based upon that. You have to have some things that are based on price, which is for-profit. You have to have some things that are based on value, which is non-profit. Imagine the amount of wealth here in the United States that's simply thrown away. Literally, Hundreds, if not thousands of gallons of milk are dumped into sewers every year. Why? To control price instead of producing value. Sometimes I might not make money off of this, but there's a value from the most poor and destitute in society finding something to eat, finding something to drink, finding support. So Islam seeks to support the lowest level of society and allow them to become gainful, active members of society without also placing the full burden on the rich. Okay, so our zakat throughout the year. The purple bars that you see going from left to right are our income sources. So let's just say that in Muharram, you made money, and then by Ramadan, you had spent all of that money. And then in Jumad al-Ula, the third bar down, you started to make money, and then by Dhul Hijjah, it was gone. So Muharram of the next year, you had nothing. Or by Muharram of this year, up to Jumad al-Ula, you spent all of that money. These bars simply represent the types of income sources and streams of income that you will earn all throughout the year. When paying your zakat, you can do one of two things. You can consider every source of income as having its own zakat year. However, what's going to happen is that it's going to be extremely difficult to track all of those sources of income. It's going to be extremely difficult to say, well, I made this money from this venture and this type of wealth at this time, and in this month it went below, and at this month went above. So the idea behind nisab, the minimum amount, is to say, look, money that's all of the same type, just add it all together. And if you've consistently had more than that minimum amount, that means you've been stable for the year and you have savings, you should give from that savings. So if we looked at across all these types of all these sources of income, then in Ramadan, we've consistently had money every Ramadan. Now, this is simply a slide to kind of draw the point home, that you will have different sources of income, that sometimes you'll spend all of it, sometimes it'll remain consistent. But the idea here is with what you have throughout the year. So there are three main times of the year that people of the past would, especially the generation of the companions and the students of the companions, would pay their zakat. That's represented by the small arrows at the bottom of the slide. So there's an arrow in Muharram. Some of the Salaf used to pay their zakat in Muharram because they looked at it as giving enough zakat for a person to subsist throughout the entire year. Notice, subsist through the entire year. Not just give them enough money to put gas in their car and push it down the road. And this is a very important point for anyone who's involved with collection of zakat and distribution of zakat in Muslim communities. Many times you have masjids sitting on thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of your zakat money that they never give out. They never give it out. Why? Because every time someone comes and asks them, they go, I'm not sure. He doesn't look like he's deserving. Because they themselves never educated themselves about the rules of zakat. And they'll be happy to borrow against the zakat fund for a new dome, but they do not allow the poor to benefit from it directly. And that is completely unacceptable. So before you give your zakat this year, you need to find out what the zakat policy of that organization is and if they're using it for the primary purposes of zakat. That's number one. So Muharram was the month where many of the Salaf would give their zakat to be able to give people the ability to subsist for the year. The second time was in Sha'ban. And the reason why they would give it in Sha'ban was to give the poor that would allow them to live comfortably throughout Ramadan, number one. And then number two, to meet their obligation so that all the extra sadaqah they gave in Ramadan was multiplied, hopefully by 700 or more. So the idea is that if I finish my fard prayer, I pray nawafil, right? So I finish my fard, I pray the sunnah afterwards. Because the sunnah is going to, inshallah, have great reward. So the idea here is I'm going to finish my obligation of zakat before Ramadan, so that in Ramadan, all of my sadaqah is getting multiplied by 700. And then some would pay their zakat in Ramadan, right, for the reward of that one act to be multiplied that time. Which of these three perspectives is right? They're all right. They're all okay. The important thing is that you know that you have money, how to calculate it, and then that you give and you give consistently. Okay, so let's find the minimum liability amount, or the nisab. I actually updated this slide last night to make sure that the amounts are accurate. And essentially what you want to do is take the daily price per gram, multiply it by the number of grams for the nisab, so 595 for silver, and that gives us a nisab today of $442.15. If I look at my bank account balance and I say to myself, I've had more than $442 throughout the entire year, I already know I have. Alhamdulillah, right? I think, most of us, we don't realize the amount of wealth and access to resources that we have here in the United States for people that are lower middle and lower class many times is greater than people have ever had in the history of mankind. The amount of food that is in a local grocery store outstrips the type of food that would be found in medieval kingdoms hundreds of years ago. So we are truly blessed to have a lot, right? So I say that to say, don't nitpick about your zakat, please. And if you want to understand how small the amount of zakat that you actually have to give is, go home today and take a banana, okay? Cut that banana into 10 pieces. And then take one piece and cut it into fourths. And then take 1/4 and throw it outside. And the rest of the banana is yours. Literally, a piece of the whole banana won't come up to be more than your pinky finger. But yet we go, if I give my zakat, I'm going to be impoverished and on the street. No. People, I have $500,000 in savings. If I give zakat, I'm just not sure I'm going to be able to survive. Come on, right? We have to be real with ourselves. All right. So we want to take our assets minus our liabilities. That equals our current net worth. We want to find out how much wealth that we have is liable. Is that $16,500 I have in savings more than the nisab for the year? Absolutely. Is it? So then I take that, multiply it by 2.5%. I will then give $412.15 in zakah. Let's say that I had haram earnings. Let's say that I had investments in the stock market. I got interest from a bank account. I got whatever it was. And that was equal to $1,500. Roll all of that together, give it away at one time. Why? Because absolving yourself, تطهير المال من المال الحرام, so purifying your wealth from impermissible wealth, can go to the same recipients as zakat. So there are three approaches to haram wealth. Number one is it should only go to the poor and the needy. Number two is that it can go to any of the 8 categories of zakah. And number 3 can go to any general community project that helps the poor, like building a well or building bathrooms or something like that. Which of these 3 is right? It's up to you. It's a judgment call. But the important thing is calculate that haram wealth and get rid of it. If you want more details on how to do that, I have all of the calculations in my book, Simple Zakat Guide, that you can refer to, inshallah ta'ala. And with that, we're done with session 4. Can I have a time check, please, Abid? We're good? Okay, so 10-minute break.